Kurt, for another week of PBT Extra, we're getting awfully close. I mean, it's like right around the corner. Basketball's almost here. I could smell it. The autumn leaves are in New York. Like I walked by Central Park the other day, and I actually saw yellow leaves. I was so happy. How is the fall going for you right now?
Yeah, it's I'm in Southern California. The seasons are muted, shall we say? It's all kind of there was some rain, so I guess we're going to call that fall, but it's getting look. I like it when it's a little cooler, so I'm enjoying that, and just kind of like I've said before, like there's just a rhythm to the fall that just isn't there for me in the summer when there's no games and my kids are all home, and it's great, but it's just different. Now it's back into the rhythm of the season, and trying to find time to watch, the Redeem Team documentary that I don't know when I'm going to figure out when I'm going to watch it now. So
yeah, there's so many things happening. Like right now in New York, the art world's back in full swing. So like there's all these shows. I love art. So there's all these openings and shows in like Chelsea and on the Upper East Side and stuff. And then the crazy thing too is that the opera's like back in full swing. So I was just walking around. It's like I said, perfect fall weather. You have your sweater, your trench coat, walking around New York City. And I just showed up to the opera. You can just show up there and buy tickets. Like
nice.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know this. Did you know that? Was that thing?
No, I assumed getting like into the Met would be hard, or getting into any of it. Like, and the one New York thing on my bucket list, because I'm a jazz fan, is whether it's with Wynton Marsalis or whoever's next, is seeing the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra someday in Lincoln Center. That is high on my list of I've got to get that as soon as I win the lottery and have money and time.
No, it's a must. Yeah. So I went over to, because the Metropolitan Opera is right next. I don't know if you've seen the movie Moonstruck, but like the fountain, the lights, it's right next to Juilliard. It's so cool. So you see the fountain, the lights, you just walk up like 30 minutes before showtime. You go to the box office counter, get a ticket. It's like $40, which in opera prices is actually pretty crazy.
That's really good. Yeah,
really good. Because in Chicago, when I was living there for a brief spell, I went to the opera just to see how much it would cost. $100 for the cheapest ticket.
Yeah, that's what LA is.
It's crazy.
I've gone before, but I remember paying about $100 a ticket or more. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I saw Medea and it was awesome. So I am all pro fall. It's wonderful. I can finally wear my Letterman jacket for Notre Dame again. But we have, since we're right around the corner, we're knocking really on the door of basketball present Army. It's here next week. Season starts. We're in the middle of preseason. The biggest story that I want to bring to your attention right now is what's happening in Golden State. This is concerning, I would say, to say the least. Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole, stepping away from the team for a time. It looks as though he's ready to join the team for opening tip to the start of the season. But as far as the damage done to the Warriors culture coming off of a championship, what is undoubtedly one of the greatest dynasties in basketball history, what does this do to that tarnish or that burnish around the trophy that is Golden State?
I don't know that it burnishes the trophies, but like it does change them going forward. I think a lot. It feels like, at least, and tell me if you get this same sense. My sense is, hey, and Steve Kerr used the word equity a few times. Like, hey, we've got 4 championships that we don't win without this guy, and we're not even going to get into the 5th one. He cost them with that penalty against LeBron back in 2016, but I think that equity has been used up. Doesn't it feel like, all right, Draymond, just a fine, no suspension. We're bringing you back in the fold, but you're on double secret probation now, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like he doesn't get another screw up, especially a guy who is coming to the end of a contract, right? Like, doesn't it feel like different?
It does feel a little different. I agree with you. And I think the word equity or the word trust, he also, Steve Kerr also used the word trust. The trust has been broken.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty interesting, because when you think about it, obviously Steph Curry is the DNA of that team, clearly. But Draymond's like a very important part of the emotional heartbeat of that team. And if the trust has been broken in that sense, I would think that's pretty concerning for this season.
I would agree. I'm curious how they bounce back. This is another case, though, where I think that they can get through adversity. I'm not sure how the Nets will handle adversity, right? Like you've got teams where you're just not sure. I think they can do it, but if Draymond crosses the line, it just feels like things are more fragile than they were before. Like they just really can't take another blow.
Yeah, and when I think about the future of Golden State, because you're right, I think we're at a pretty interesting moment here. Jordan Poole's up for a new contract, and so is Draymond Green. You think about that core that has been together for a decade plus, that won all those championships. What does the next generation look like? That to me is where it matters as far as the trust is broken. Because in theory, what would happen is maybe what happened in San Antonio, where you have one stable piece, which is Tim Duncan over 20 years, right? And he teaches everybody, right? And this is what it means to be part of the San Antonio culture. And then you have Tony and Manu and Kawhi, everyone kind of follow suit. What's fascinating to me here is what we see kind of a rupture as far as, well, what happens going forward for the young players who will inherit the Warriors. Jordan Poole's Warriors, the Kuminga's Warriors, Wiseman's Warriors. How will they think about the culture moving forward?
I think it's a really good question. And I think, by the way, the contract subtext thing, I know everybody with the Warriors publicly and privately played that down, but I can't believe that didn't factor in. Jordan Poole, by the time we talk again next week, Corey, and do our next podcast and video, I would bet he has a new contract. I would bet that he has something close to what Tyler Hero just got at $30 million a year over 4 years. I think that's now the market for him. I would be surprised if he doesn't get that. But then where does that go? Where does that look? They've said that they can't really afford to extend Draymond and Wiggins and Poole at the prices they want and stay, even for the ridiculous amount of money the Warriors are spending, that they can't really go there. So who's the odd? There's a sense around the league that the music's going to stop and someone's not going to have a chair. It's not going to be Poole at 24.
Yeah.
But do they just take, if they think Wiggins is consistent this year, do they go there and say, Draymond, you're going to have to take a pay cut to stay? Or I'm curious how much this impacts that decision down the line, as opposed to, Steph Curry's still performing, but they gave Steph Curry the 5-year max, and maybe he's not the same guy at the end of that, but you don't care. You'll pay Steph Curry for past performance, and he'll still fill the building, and you'll be happy. I don't think they feel that way about Draymond.
This is where you start getting into, well, this is the cuts to the bone. I don't know if you ever got, one time I accidentally, well, this is stupid. One time I accidentally cut myself with a samurai sword. Don't ask me this story. I was playing Fruit Ninja.
Hey, that's a story for another day, though. I do.
For another day, different podcast. But my hand was split open, and I could see my, it was like a horror film. It was like Halloween, right? I could actually see my tendons, my muscles. It was disgusting, right? I'd never seen a cut that deep before. And that's kind of where we're inching towards, as in terms of, okay, well, what do you mean to our franchise as an aging player who's a core member of our dynasty, but not named Steph Curry, And I think you're going to start seeing the reality of, like you said, either drastic pay cuts to stay a part of this team, or because you think about Andrew Wiggins, I think he's earned a very sizable contract the past 2 years. He's been unbelievably consistent and accepted that role, and it's been essential to them being successful. Klay Thompson, he's definitely more in a safer position than Draymond. I think out of the three, Draymond is the most expendable. And when you start talking about Poole's contract and Wiseman, and I think once again you have a little more space with Wiseman because he's been injured and he's still young, so you can probably. You're more flexible there.
I think it's a big year.
This is starting to get very clear which direction they're going to move it in the future, as far as to the bone. What do you bring to our franchise?
No, I agree, and it's going to be interesting to watch them develop over the years and see who steps. This is a big year for Kuminga. I trust Moses Moody is going to be good. I'm weirdly not worried about him, but his role will step up. I think it's a big year for Wiseman. I think that. Ultimately, they want him to take over for Kevon Looney, but Kevon Looney has been rock solid for them on the court. And then, if you watched Kerr speak yesterday, he said Looney's kind of been their emotional center through this whole thing and been very mature. And he had nothing but praise for how Kevon Looney stepped up as a team leader in this situation. That's a hard thing to get rid of, and it's asking a lot of James Wiseman to suddenly step in and just supplant him.
Yeah, I think he's kind of one of those guys where you think Looney is one of those guys where you don't really understand his value until you
Yeah.
take him out of the equation, you know?
Yeah.
And then you start thinking, oh wow, this is more than just stats, right? Like, and that's kind of what I think Coach Kerr was talking about. Because if you read any of these comments or you watch the team over the past few years, Looney is one of he just keeps coming up. Like everyone keeps talking about how important he is to this team. And I'm looking at the stats. I watch the games. I'm like, it doesn't seem like he's impacting the game at like let's say another big guy like a Rudy Gobert level,
Right.
But it's still his impact. I think it's kind of like 2 + 2 = 10.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting point, Kurt. One thing I want to talk about just briefly before we move on is the juxtaposition of what we're seeing with Draymond and what we're seeing in college football and in the NFL. Devontae Adams shoved somebody after Monday Night Football recently, and he got charged with a misdemeanor assault for a violent shove. The guy fell down, right? I don't know if you've seen that video.
I have seen that video. Yeah, it was kind of hard to miss. Yeah.
And then you saw recently Tennessee's safety Jalen McCullough was arrested on a felony charge where he punched somebody. This is reportedly he assaulted a man at an apartment complex, punched him, fell down, and he was bleeding. Right, the guy fell down a flight of stairs and was bleeding, and it's a felony assault charge. So if you've watched the video of Draymond punching Jordan Poole, it's definitely more violent than Devontae Adams' shove. And it looks as though, it's like right up there with what McCullough did with this guy. This is why I think the leak for the TMZ video was so why the Warriors wanted to investigate it so thoroughly and why they were so passionate about trying to keep it quiet, because that video, that footage, I mean, that borders on criminal, which is like, I mean, this is not just like a scuffle in practice. I think that's one of the reasons why I immediately stepped away. And so that the juxtaposition of those two instances really paint this into a different light for me, Kurt.
Yeah. As a former police beat reporter, I would say that one key difference is that the guy pushed by Adams filed charges. Obviously, Poole did not. In fact, he was out shooting free throws after still shooting when the media came in after that event and didn't know. So he didn't press it. And I think that's part of it. I think, by the way, the other thing, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this, is that the other reason I think the team really reacted to that video on top of the potential criminal stuff is that they felt their space was violated, right? Like hey, the practice is ours. The media is not in there. There's, this is our space, our time. And to have that go public, they felt like something private of theirs was pushed out into the light when it shouldn't have been. And I'm curious because obviously you've been at a lot of high level practices. That's a space. Football's a little different because I think there tends to be media around. There tends to be just more people around than the kind of closed gym practices you get in the NBA. But is that a private space for them? Do they feel that they've been robbed of that kind of space?
Yeah, I mean, people are very, touchy around practice and, trade secrets and all that stuff, generally speaking. But you also think, you especially in this environment where you're a professional athlete, everything you do is under a magnifying glass and scrutinized. That you would hope that there is one kind of like sacred place where you can just go and work on, just work. Like this is your job. So just go to practice and do your job. And so I do understand that in the sense of what you're saying, as far as like it's a private space, a sacred space for people. But like I said, at the end of the day, for me, I don't think there's any sort of place for that kind of violence.
No.
And that's whether it be in a sacred place or not. Like to me, that is not okay whatsoever. And so that's kind of where I fall on the issue.
No, I think he absolutely crossed the line. That was a violent punch intended to hurt. That wasn't the, hey, we're bumping chests, we're pushing, waiting for guys to separate us, so we're not really fighting. That was intentional. And I think and I think, one of the things you heard was a lot of the Warriors, if you watch the video, I mean, they're practicing. Curry's got his back turned to this whole thing because they're running sets on the court. I don't think a lot of the team realized how violent the act was until they saw the video. And I think that changed the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah. And the last thing I would like to say about this is I think we forget about what the NBA used to be. I don't know if you remember, like, the NBA in the 80s and 90s where it seems like people were getting in fights. You look at those highlights, it's like everyone just throwing punches like that on the court, like during an NBA game. And I think David Stern worked really hard to get that out of the NBA.
Yeah.
So we saw a little bit of like a reversion to what the NBA used to be with Malice in the Palace. Do you remember that? I mean, that was so. So
that was not the only one where fans were involved, sadly. So back
but like that kind of violence in the NBA, David Stern, I think, worked really hard to reframe the NBA from guys from inner city neighborhoods who maybe categorized or typecast as thugs, to being respectable businessmen who are they own media companies, they're winning Oscars and Emmys, like they're sports personalities and pop culture personalities. So I think that anything around that kind of any reversion to like what the NBA used to be, I think is a big no-no. Just because of that history that all of us have, like deep in our bones, we remember what it used to be, and I don't think any of us want to go back to that.
No, that's a really good point.
So moving forward, there seems to be an interesting battle. Everyone wants the championship, but what about the #1 overall pick? we saw what was tantalizing. 2 players, Scoot Henderson, but this is the big one, Victor Wembanyama, who, I mean, people were calling him like an alien. They're calling him like super rare, elite talent. He's super young, 7'4", can handle the ball, block shots, making 3-pointers at like Steph Curry clips. He made 7 3-pointers out of 11.
Yeah,
the first game. 7'4", you see him playing the game like he's waving people off, dribbling people up and then pulling up. Crossing people up and then pulling up 3 or 4 feet outside the 3-point line as a 7'4" player. Have you ever seen anyone like this?
No, and nobody has. I think that's the funny thing. You listen to people try to come up with comps, and they're like, well, maybe a better Ralph Sampson. Like, what if you took Kevin Durant and grew him 4 inches? Like, it's really tough to come up with good comps, because what I thought was really impressive was, like, in the first game, they run a little side pick and roll, not, sort of an elbow extended pick and roll for him. He's a 7'4" guy handling the ball in a pick and roll. The guy guarding him goes under the pick. He goes, all right, I'll just shoot, and drains it. Like, it is a smooth, effortless motion. He had a leaner in the corner on one play in transition. It was, I'm not a scout, and the scouts and the people I do know were kind of like, everybody, some of them had seen him, but seeing him in person against a good level of competition, that is a good G League Ignite team, really turned heads. There's, like I said, it's not only the offense and the things we're talking about. He blocked a lot of shots. He altered a lot more. He is one of those really, at 7'4" with a 7'11" wingspan. He is just in the vicinity, changing everything, able to cover ground, moves. I guess part of it is basically, I just don't remember, Corey, ever seeing a 7'4" guy that fluid, like, move that well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the French pterodactyl. I mean, that's crazy. 5 blocks. He's like shooting 7 3-pointers. The thing about him, though, when I was watching him, he moves well, but it's like, it looks almost deceptive how, like, it's like, it's funny. I would love to see him in person, because it looks like on tape he looks very slow, but he's also like you said, he glides, I should say. Like I said, I think the French pterodactyl is probably like a decent metaphor or nickname for how he glides around the floor. And I remember there's one shot he had. So basically, he squared somebody up, and the guy came over to help. Another defender came over to help. He takes a jab step, fade away into the baseline. Yeah, I mean, this is like a 20-foot fadeaway jumper, nothing but the bottom of the net. And I'm thinking, that's like a Kobe Bryant move. You don't see a 7'4" guy doing that, squaring somebody up, jab step, fadeaway, turn around, fadeaway jumper at 18, 20 feet. That's scary, because think about that's the thing that made Kevin Durant, indefensible, is that no one can block his shot. If he gets to a spot and elevates, who's going to block a 7-foot jump shooter? Yeah, it's like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook. It's who can block that, and so that's where I was thinking he has an indefensible move, and this is still early in his career.
Yeah, I was thinking Dirk too was the other one with that one-legged fadeaway where you're like, good luck. Yeah, you can't. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting, and I think the other thing that really came out of that, and the reason you're going to see a push for tanking more this year, you're going to see teams jump into this, is Scoot Henderson's good. Scoot Henderson, I loathe these kinds of comparisons, but I've now had two scouts that I talked to use the Derrick Rose model, like the young Derrick Rose, that level of athleticism and more importantly, body control, like just incredible body control, fearlessly going at Wembanyama. Got blocked a couple times, but also got buckets around him a couple times. If now, instead of like, oh, well, we've only got a 14% chance under the new lottery guidelines to get first. Yeah, but I've got a 27 or whatever the numbers are, depending on where you land, percent chance to get one of those two. And suddenly that kind of push to go back just makes more sense. Like, I think you're going to see not only teams that, look, there's teams we knew were, Utah clearly targeted this year, and Orlando's going to be entertaining and Houston's going to be entertaining, but they're not going to win a lot of games because they're going to play their youth. But I think, Corey, could this be the year we see a good team, a pretty good team, who suffers an early injury or just starts slow and have, normally you have to sell your owner on this. They're going to be able to go, you saw Wembanyama, right? I wouldn't be surprised to see more teams pivot mid-season than we're used to.
Yeah, when do you think that pivot happens?
Earlier than later this year. I really think sometimes. I think the example is Portland last year, right? They were okay, and then once Lillard got hurt and it was clear, well, the stomach issue that was acting up, and it was clear he's just going to be out. They were trading McCollum. We're revamping this thing. I think you're going to see somebody make that kind of move. But I think rather than waiting till the trade deadline, it could be Christmas. It could be like people pivoting way earlier because they're not going to be the only ones. And there's going to be a push to get in the lower your odds, even in the flattened lottery. I think the flattened lottery helps a little bit because you used to think, man, 6 isn't good enough. Now you're like, 6 is actually going to give me a decent chance. So like, I think it's going to get really interesting. I don't know that that's good for the league, by the way. It's going to drive Adam Silver nuts, but I think it's what you're going to see this year just because it's such a crazy year with good prospects.
I was reading an article about what Nick Batum thought about Wembanyama because he saw him, in the French system. He's had his eyes on him since he was a 14-year-old. Apparently, he called Tony Parker right away. It's like, I found the next one, not just for basketball, but I found the next one, period. Like the hype that he's thought about Wembanyama is similar to what Luka generated as far as hype is concerned. Yeah. And I know a team in San Antonio that loves French basketball players, and that is toward the bottom of the.
And it's not, with all due respect to your team, and actually, they'll play hard for Popovich. That's not a really good team. They're going to struggle this year. Your Spurs are going to rack up some losses. As much as I like Vassell, I think that they've got some nice young players. They're going to be in this mix this year, and it would be very Spursian to get one of those guys and then build an empire around them.
One can hope. One can hope. One can dream. So now let's kind of pivot over to this was always one of my favorite parts of the show. We talk about fun things that are kind of like a little off kilter, a little off color. It's kind of fun. So when we think about this summer TV schedule, clearly, like you said, your whole family was home, no NBA games.
Yeah.
What was like? What were you watching? that was like the show this summer for you.
We watched a few things. Obviously, Stranger Things was kind of a big hit. I think a lot of people saw that, and then we're watching House of Dragons because we were Game of Thrones people. The best thing I saw, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, the best thing I thought I really loved this summer was The Bear. Which is, there's one season of it, one of the guys from Shameless on Hulu, about a chef who has to come back home and take over his father's business, food business in Chicago. I thought was phenomenal. I part of it maybe was working in restaurants in my past, but I loved it. So that was really good. And I just, we did that. And the thing is, you're not a guy who, I'm curious what you watch, because you don't watch a lot of television. You've been doing films lately.
Yeah, I've been deep in the film world. I mean, I've been like art house, movie house, because it's just so, I do this thing called Criterion Collection. It's Criterion Channel. It's like a Netflix, but for art movies.
Okay.
And it has been one of the greatest things this summer for me. I mean, I've had it for a couple of years, but this summer I really leaned in hard. So last week, I watched 5 Alfred Hitchcock movies.
Ooh.
Yeah. And my favorite out of them were, I mean, I love Rear Window, but my favorite one was the 39 Steps. Like, and Foreign Correspondent was really like a cool concept too. But just like watching these classic movies, I've been watching a ton of Hitchcock because I think it's so fascinating. Like the idea of like, well, how do you build suspense in music? I think one of the best suspense builders is James Brown. And I mean, there was a time when I only listened to James Brown for like an entire summer, for like 3 months. I like only listened to James Brown. And the way that he can make you groove for 13 minutes, like a song will go on for 13 minutes, Kurt, but then he'll end it like on the one beat at like 13 minutes and 1 second. And you'll like, wait, why'd you cut the music off? Like, keep playing. I was in the middle of my dance. And that's what I love about him is like, he always builds suspense, but he's generous. And Hitchcock's like that too. The movie will end in the last 60 seconds of the film. Like, you have to watch it until the last minute. And I love that. It's like every film is like a 2-minute drill, or every film comes down to the last shot, like Michael Jordan taking the last shot. It's pretty great.
I not only am a Hitchcock fan, but also one of the things we did a little this summer. My wife and daughter got to do a little more because high school graduation, they went to Europe for a while. When I during the middle of summer league and free agency, when I could not go, but travel is kind of my fix now. It's like what I want. But when we were going up and down up the California coast a few years ago, we went to the town where they filmed. Like, you can see the house from birds.
Wow.
And you can go like see some of the sets and some of not sets, but some of the houses and some of the stuff they used up in Central California on the coast. And there's even like a bird cafe there where you can go in and it's all movie themed cafe up there. But it was I love doing that kind of stuff. I like exploring cities and going places. You know, we got to go to Mexico a little this summer. Travel is my new. It's frankly one of my favorite parts of this job is I don't know how much time I would have gotten in even like Cleveland or some of these places that, hey, LeBron's good, I'm going to be in Cleveland a lot. It's easy, you know. San Francisco I'd been to, but like some of these places, San Antonio was a place I had not gotten to explore until the job. Like, I love going to cities, walking around them, getting them to try them out. So like getting to do a little traveling this summer was good. Hopefully next summer we'll get to do a little more.
There's this really great show, by the way. I don't know if it's a great show. It was entertaining, but there's this movie where it talks about these two guys who just go. That's like the whole point of the movie is like a guy has to write an article about food, and he just brings his friend and just goes to Italy and goes to Spain, and they just like go have fun and go to dinner and just talk. But in the NBA version of that, you know, which is really fascinating, is kind of like those Coach Popovich wine dinners, you know, like where you're just like on the road and like, you know, you go play in Philly, you go play in LA, and then go to a great dinner and just have, you know, great conversations, just basketball related, and, you know, learn from all your international teammates. That'd be pretty sweet if that was a show. Anyone's out there like, you know, development for movies or TV shows, that would be cool. And then the other one I think would be really sweet is there's some NBA players who back in the day, this is back in the 90s, Kurt, when they're great art collectors. And when I say great art collectors, I'm not talking about art collectors who, you know, collect like trendy stuff. I'm talking about great art collectors who, you know, understand the game and study the history, and they build like thoughtful collections. They would go around and take rookies and young guys with them to different art museums. Every city they'd go to. So instead of going out to the clubs or going out to, you know, all these places that probably would, you know, be dangerous for a young rookie, these guys would take the young players or go themselves to different museums or go visit different artist studios, and they would start collecting that way, which I think is a really brilliant way to start collecting art and seeing artists around the country.
Isn't fashion more that thing now? Like the guys, it's about the fits and about the clothes, which I know you're also following far more closely than I.
Yes, it is a lot about the fits. You know, now you see people in like Paris Fashion Week in the off season and stuff, which is, like I said, you know, to each their own. But I fall more into the whole, you know, like either the San Antonio wine dinners or the art collection stuff.
Hey, I'll go to Paris, man. If you want to send me to Paris, I'm good with that.
Yeah, maybe let's talk to Dan, our super producer. Can we set that up, Dan? Let's send the pod. Let's do the pod Paris Fashion Week.
You know what we got to pitch? You and I both need to cover the Maui Invitational in person. I think that's the only way we can really get a good look at these guys.
See, now we're cooking with gas. Now we're cooking with gas. For all the NBA news, articles, and more, check us out at NBCSports.com/NBA. And along with NBA starting up next week, we're actually going to go back to weekly episodes, Kurt.
Yes,
so
I'm
I
excited
can't
about
wait
that.
to talk to you every week instead of every other week.